Yes, welcome back, Loony listeners. You are listening to Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast. This is episode 94, and I am absolutely thrilled to have a special guest on what is a special segment tonight. So, yes, I am your High Priest of Khonshu Rey, and if you had done your homework and looked up into the night sky, you would have seen it was a full moon around the weekend. So, with the full moon, Khonshu has decreed that we do a Moon and Stars review, and that is basically us looking at Moon Knight in film or TV. Now, I know a lot of you are screaming to have Moon Knight, on a Netflix show or on a cable show or in a movie format. We have reviewed some fan films of Moon Knight so far, which has been a very, very fun indeed. But tonight, I am absolutely thrilled to have with me a massive Moon Knight fan. He's also a co-host of a podcast called Capes on the Couch, where Comics Get Counselling. We have Anthony Sytko. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ray. It is an honor and a privilege to be here with you, especially given the time zone difference from the U.S. to Australia.
Look, it always makes podcasting special, I think for both parts. So for me, it's heading towards the late night, the witching hour. For you, it's early morning. So this will be a very cool chat to have with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely been looking forward to this one for a while now.
Yep, and for loonies who have read our newsletter in the lead up to this, should know that actually Anthony is on the show because Anthony is the writer of a Moon Knight script for a film. So we thought it would be great for our Moon and Stars segment to have Anthony on and to discuss his script. So what we'll be doing, we'll actually be just talking a little bit, just to get to know Anthony, of course, but also to look at the background of the script as well as discuss, I guess, his take on Moon Knight for how he'd like to see it on film. But before that, Anthony, I'd really like to pay a massive shout out to your podcast, Capes on the Couch. Would you be able to let our fair loonies know a little bit about Capes on the Couch?
Sure. Capes on the Couch, we've been doing it, by the time this airs, it will have been for over a year, and it is my best friend from many, many years, is a board-certified psychiatrist here in the States, in New Jersey. And we're both big comic book fans, and one of the things that we wanted to do was figure out a way to destigmatize some of the discussions around mental health. Mm-hmm. And we figured that since comic books and the comic book characters and the movies are all so pervasive in the pop culture zeitgeist, there are myriad comic book characters with various mental health issues, and a lot of those issues are not always necessarily depicted in an accurate fashion. So one of the things that we thought we could do was describe what these characters are going through in a somewhat of a realistic term. How would you treat these characters? And then one of the fun things that we do at the end of every episode is we play a little role-playing skit wherein I play the patient, quote unquote, and Doc Issues, my co-host, plays the doctor, and we treat each of the characters. And we've done dozens of characters. We did Moon Knight, was one of the episodes. I believe it was our 4th episode very early on. We've done some big names. We've done, Cyclops, Captain America. Later today, we're doing the Punisher. And we've done some more, some lower tiered characters. We did Booster Gold. And it's not just Marvel and DC. We've done Walking Dead. We did Spawn. So it's really run the gamut of comic book characters. And you can find all of our episodes on our website, which is capesonthecouch.live. Mm-hmm. We are available on all the social medias at Capes on the Couch.
Yeah, and I highly recommend it, Loonies. Look, I've mentioned these guys before. You may have heard their ad played on our shows previously as well. But I think, Anthony, that you and Doc Issues really have struck gold, I guess, with this idea. It really had excited me when I came across it. The first thing I thought of when I saw your podcast and read what it was about, before I even listened to it, there were a lot of, I like to browse bookshops and stuff, and there were a lot of books that spoke of the psychology of, particular films. Like I remember reading one on The Matrix. Not only there was things on philosophy and psychology on it. And I think it's just fantastic that you've actually applied that to comic books, which are massive at the moment. I mean, you don't have to be a comic book fan. If you're a moviegoer or someone who likes watching TV, you'd be familiar with the universe there. But it's such an interesting marriage, I think, of psychology and comics, and it really works. And I think the rapport that you have with Doc Issues is has a lot to do with that. So you guys go way back, right?
Oh, yeah. We've been friends since we were in high school together. Yeah. We're best men at each other's weddings.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So, I'm godfather to his daughter.
Yeah.
So
wow.
He's a brother to me. So I've known him a long, long time.
Yeah. And the synergy, I think, that works really well. You mentioned the plays that you have, the skits towards the end. A really nice idea, like recurring to happen in every show, to actually literally put the comic book character on the couch and have them talk to Doc Issues. I know that you both co-write these scripts as well, but geez, Doc Issues, he gets he gets put through the ringer a bit.
Yeah, he does. And that was something that we joked about very early on, because our first episode was Eddie Brock, and then our second episode was the Joker. And when we were writing them, we said there's basically no way that he would realistically survive an encounter with either of these people. And then it just became sort of a running gag.
Yeah.
That if it's a villain, he's going to die.
Yeah.
And sometimes even if it's a hero, there's a good chance that he's going to die. It just makes it for a lot of fun, and he's game for everything, and I appreciate that. And that's one of the things I love about him is he's willing to go along with it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, also as well, I remember listening to, because I've listened to a lot of your episodes. There was one with there's a pop psychology. It was with about the Incredible Hulk.
Yes, Popcorn Psychology.
Popcorn
Psychology.
Friends of ours, yeah, really, that was really entertaining, actually. And the Hulk, my God, he has a lot of skeletons in his closet there.
Just a bit.
But they had a lot of fun with it as well. It actually, well, I can't say it didn't surprise me, because I'm not too familiar with them, but it's good to see that you have guests on who are kind of willing to go along for the ride. I mean, acting can be a bit of a daunting thing. You have multiple roles in it. You literally play all the different characters. Did you find that hard at first, or do you have a background in acting? Or?
Well, I've acted since I was a kid. I've done bits here and there. I was in radio for a couple of years. I was a newscaster. I tried to get into voiceover acting and doing characters, because I've been doing impressions literally my entire life. Yeah, right. And I get it from my father. So that was another thing that when we were discussing how would we do this, that the podcast came up, and the skits, and I can do voices. And so it was, I really, some of my favorite ones were, I think, the Joker, because I did all of the different Joker iterations. I was the Cesar Romero Joker. I was the Nicholson Joker. I was the Mark Hamill Joker. I was the Heath Ledger Joker, and I got to transform back and forth. And then anytime I do a woman's voice, it's always interesting, because do I pitch correct? How high do I make my voice naturally? Yeah. When I did the Punisher, I was basically doing my best John Bernthal impression, basically, just don't move the jaw. And so it's fun to try and figure out how to make each character sound, realistically speaking.
You've got to be honest as well, you've got a really nice timbre to your voice as well. So I think it's quite amenable to for you to do impressions. So
well, thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really really fun to listen to. So yeah, so Looney's definitely. We'll put your details as well in the show notes, and definitely check it out. We're going to be sprucing it all over our social platforms as well when this episode airs.
And likewise, we will obviously be, posting the bejesus out of this.
Oh, cheers! I actually remember when I first came across you guys. I think it was Doc Issues. He was quite kind of tongue in cheek, saying, "Oh, Anthony, there's I think you found the other handful of Moon Knight fans out there." And I was going, "Oh, hang on, no,
yeah.
You'd be surprised. There are a lot of Moon Knight fans out there." And
no, he gives me a lot of flack. He appreciates the character, but he is certainly not the aficionado that I am.
Well,
I think very few are, like we are.
My gosh, I will get to that very shortly as well. I'd like to really touch upon your Mooney fandom. But heading into this anyway, look, just abstractly speaking, before we get into your script as well, Moon Knight, look, just as an abstract concept for you, why does he appeal to you so much, like as opposed to other heroes that you may like?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I can honestly say that I can't remember a time that I was really into comic books and I wasn't into Moon Knight. Right. So as far as what draws me to him, mm-hmm. I think it's just from a personal standpoint, it's the multiplicity of his nature, mm-hmm. and because he has the various identities. Me personally, not that I have the dissociative identity disorder or I play multiple characters, but in my personal life and my professional life, I wear so many different hats that okay. I have to transition from one role to another, sometimes very quickly, mm-hmm. and I have to go from being the hard-assed, take no prisoners, take no nonsense type person when dealing with one particular issue at work to I then have to be, when I come home, I'm obviously not that person to my wife. Mm-hmm. And to my family, and then there's with my friends, and so I have sort of a very fluid nature, I guess. And so when reading about Moon Knight, which actually does sort of tie into the script, which I'll get to, when we start talking about that, just the character appealed to me from that perspective, because here's a guy who has to constantly be different versions of himself. Mm-hmm. And yet, so there's that struggle to always maintain the authenticity, that core of authenticity, no matter whether for Moon Knight's case, whether he's being Stephen or Jake or Mark or Moon Knight, what have you. And then for me, regardless of whatever position I'm in, whatever version of me that I'm being, that is always still authentically Anthony. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of connected to him on that level. And then if on a more shallow level, I just thought the costume was really badass. And I just, I just it appealed to me on that very graphic, basic level that, he's just cool with the cape and the, the white and everything, the moon. So
a lot of loonies that we've spoken to as well, they were introduced to Moon Knight, funnily enough, through video games, Ultimate Alliance, and it was for that very fact, the aesthetic. Like, he looked like just a kick-ass character, and that seems to be a common thread for a lot of loonies. So not surprised at all that that's a big thing for you as well. And you're absolutely right. The complexities of Moon Knight just make him so different from anything else. The only thing while you were explaining it then, that I was thinking would be similar, but in a simpler level, would be, say, like your Incredible Hulk, where you have Bruce Banner and you have the Hulk, and there's that running thread of the essence of Bruce Banner in the Hulk, say. But I guess even then you can think of, who comes first? Is there a bit of Hulk in there, or is there a bit of Banner in Hulk? That is a fascinating part of Moon Knight. And incidentally, Anthony, as well, I guess from that, I'm just curious, what was the first volume of Moon Knight that you read then?
That would be Volume 1, Issue 1.
Oh, really?
Okay. The Mensch Sienkiewicz.
Okay.
To do what they must, they become one to do what they must, or whatever the tagline on the cover is.
Yes.
That famous number 1 issue, and I found that at my local comic shop for I think $5.
Yeah.
And
wow.
I thought it was a steal because I thought, oh my God, this is the first Moon Knight book, and it's only $5. I didn't realize that wasn't his first appearance.
Right, yes. Yeah.
So I was like, oh wow, cool, $5, and I get this awesome comic book.
Yeah.
It's not in like the best condition, but still. And then I found out, oh yeah, you can get Volume 1, Issue 1 for a couple of bucks anywhere.
Yeah.
That issue is not the big one. It's not the first appearance.
Yeah, and that kind of like segues into my next question, which is your Moon Knight collection. So we're talking tip of the iceberg there when you bought Volume 1, Issue 1. Now, Anthony and Loony listeners who have been frequenting our ITK group, you would have seen Anthony's collection there. Anthony posted 20-odd photos of like authentic, awesome Moon Knight stuff. So any Loony or Moon Knight fan would be salivating at those photos. Anthony, a very impressive collection indeed. Can you just tell us broadly then what this collection encapsulates?
I have basically every solo issue that he's had, literally from that Volume 1, Issue 1, all the way up through to the last of the Max Bemis run. Mm-hmm. In addition to, I have every single one of those, plus I think 90-something% of 85 to 90% of the variants. There's only a handful of the very, very expensive variants that I would kill for, but my wife really tamps down on my expenditures on comic books. Yeah. And in addition to those, I have, I would say, probably 85% of his appearances in other books, whether it's the Ultimate Universe. I have all of those with the Ultimate Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. I have comics where he's literally, I think there's a Fantastic Four where he's swinging by in one panel just as, like, he's not relevant to the story at all. He's literally just swinging by the skyline. It's like a zoomed out shot of the Baxter Building, and he's just swinging by, and I have that one because he's in it. Yeah. If he's mentioned in it, if he's, on a computer screen in a background, I have it. I have, and I have so many autographs because I go to New York Comic Con every year, and I bring, you can ask my wife, hundreds of books, and I literally lay them out by order of Artist Alley, and I go through and I go, okay, I need this person, did lettering on this book. This person did the inks on this book, and I have Post-it notes. Yeah. Man, I go through Artist Alley.
You are so lucky to be able to go to New York Comic Con so easily. That's so awesome. Far out. You would, I just imagine you with a huge duffel bag or something, just lugging your stuff.
It's a big roller suitcase. Yep. And I cosplayed at you can see on the Facebook group. I did cosplay as the Declan Shalvey. That was an amazing day because I took the Declan Shalvey version of the story, of the costume rather. So it was mostly, black with the white accents and everything. And I describe it in the photo. As I had walked over to his table, he got up. Yeah. And he's the nicest guy. If you ever have the opportunity to meet Declan Shalvey, please shake his hand, talk to him. He's an amazingly wonderful, warm-hearted guy. And he got up, and he's got the most awesome Irish accent. He's like, I'd like to take a picture with you. He goes, I've never seen anybody do my costume like this before. So he shaking my hand, and then he goes, would you mind pretending to break my wrist for me? So
that was his idea, was it?
That was his idea, So I bent it back, and I was like, and he's on the ground, and he's writhing in pain. And like I said, this was right around when it was announced that he was going to be leaving after the issue 6 of the Ellis run. Yeah. And so I posted it to Twitter, and I said, I told him if he wasn't going to draw Moon Knight, he was never going to draw anything again. And then he retweeted it. Jordy Belair retweeted it. Then Dan Slott retweeted it. So cool. And I was just getting all these notifications from all these comic professionals for like a day and a half. And on my Twitter feed, it was awesome. And then every time I go to New York Comic Con and he's there, he's always like, oh, yeah, I remember you. you now? Yeah, you're the guy that cosplayed as my Moon Knight. I was like, yes, I am. So
you're the one that broke my wrist.
Awesome
yeah, oh, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yes,
actually, that's such a cool idea from Declan Shalvey, dude, because it really does encapsulate Moon Knight, doesn't it? Like, there's that violence there. There's the effortless kind of, I'm a superhero kind of thing. And yeah, I remember him tweeting about his about the Hasbro Marvel Legends figure of Moon Knight, and I think he just gets chuffed, obviously, because he's designed the thing, to actually see it in person.
That's his costume.
Yeah, so to see like the likes of yourself just walk up, it's man, how what a thrill that would be. Like, if you're a creator.
And then both times that Moon Knight has appeared in animation, it's been the Declan Shalvey costume.
Yeah, true. Secret Wars and the Avengers. We covered that in one of our episodes.
Yeah, the Avengers Assemble, and then also the Spider-Man.
Spider-Man, yeah, the Christmas special.
Yep.
Yeah, wow. I mean, you got to tip your hat to Declan Shalvey. It is a funky design. And just quickly then, Anthony, what is your favourite Moon Knight costume? That's a hard one. We have posted it before.
The favorite costume,
Mm-hmm.
I would have to go with the Shalvey.
Yeah.
The second, it's either the Shalvey or the Finch.
Yeah, Finch is good. Man.
Just because Finch's is just so brutal.
It is.
Just the way that he draws it, he's so hulking.
Yes. It'd be hard to pull off.
Obviously,
it would be hard to pull off as a cosplayer, So I think because unless you're built like that, you'd have to actually draw all the kind of the muscle tone onto the suit, which I've seen on some cosplayers. Yeah.
Well, that's another reason why I went with the Shalvey costume, because the black hides the fact that I was in good shape, but I'm not the most muscular guy. I'm more of a lean type of build.
Yeah, and it's nice and sleek.
So it worked better for me.
Yeah. And you also have, so I know you have some art commissions as well from the likes of Finch.
Yep, Sienkiewicz, Finch. I have 2 Finch pieces. I have just a couple of other smaller name artists. And it's really cool. I have most of them are hanging up in my office.
Yeah.
I posted the photos again on the feed. I'm in the office right now, which is where I record, and so they're always with me. And I've got the Funko Pops and the figurines and
a couple of the old ones as well. It's really nice to see the older figures. So nice. So I think it's safe. Actually, before I'd have to give you the honour of classing you as an Omega level Loony, Anthony.
Well, thank you. I have to say, I don't know too many Moon Knight fans that have Italian versions of the trade paperbacks.
No, I saw that as well. Oh my god, yeah, that looks nice as well.
That was so amazing. When I was on my honeymoon, I said, "Honey, we have to get these," and she goes, "Okay."
She's bless her. She's great. Sounds great. But yeah, you're right. We do have a couple of Omega level Loonies in our group as well. Just a quick shout out to Ben, Patrick, Luis. They are massively amount. But the likes of yourself, Anthony, you've cosplayed as well, and you have written a script as well. So there's a lot going for you. If we're to chalk up, we're out to compare. Not that we should, but it's just great to. I'm just always chuffed to meet massive Moon Knight fans. So Omega.
Same here, because I'm sure many of our listeners can empathize. Many of your listeners can empathize that we are the Moon Knight person in our respective social circles. So, when the fan film broke, everybody was, "Did you see this? Did you see this?
Yeah.
Have you seen this?" Yes, I saw it. And then everybody comes to you, "Oh my God, did you see this?" Yes.
Yeah.
So anything Moon Knight related, we become the focal point for that half hour of whenever that news breaks.
We're the go-to, aren't we? So let's talk about this Moon Knight fan film then. So this was released, I think it was last month. I've got this on the notes. I think it was in January. It wasn't that long ago. And
it was in January.
And it was by filmmaker, director and writer Caden Butera. And so this dropped on YouTube. Immediately there was a buzz in our community, and everyone kind of dropped the links, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't hard to just click onto it and find a link. What were your thoughts on this fan film?
I know this is going to sound like it's a hot take. And I swear it is not. So, and please, no disrespect to the filmmakers. I felt kind of meh about it. I feel like the intention was there, and I liked the the ideas. I just felt in execution, some of them fell a little flat. I didn't really find the actor playing Mark to be that great at showing the range of emotions. I understand they were going for more of like a noir type storyline, which fits with some of, I would say, probably the older Mensch stuff. So I definitely dug the aesthetic and some of the ideas and the way that they wanted to portray it. I just didn't think, and again, I'm really not trying to slag anybody, because I love and appreciate the fact that they put so much effort and time, and the care that they put into it is very evident. So I'm really trying to be, tactful when I critique it. It's just, I felt that because of the style of story that they wanted to tell, it has to be done in a very nuanced fashion, and I just felt that it was a little more ham-fisted than it should have been for some of the attempts of showing the various personalities and Mark struggling with the mental illness and all. I just thought that it was just a little over the top, and it detracted from some of the noir elements and the struggle that he was trying to show. I got what they were going for, and I liked the idea. I just thought execution probably fell a little flat. I mean, overall, I give it probably like a 7 out of 10.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that it was terrible by any means, and I also understand why they went with the costume decisions that they made. Having said that, I think that probably came down to budget more than anything else, because I do feel that there is a way that you could have done the Moon Knight classic costume without it looking like a KKK figure, but they may not have had, well, because that's what he said, that they wanted to, but it looked like a Klansman, and coming from America, I totally get why you don't want to look like a Klansman. But it was just one of those things that I just, it looked like, I don't know, it looked like something out of like a video game trying to be Moon Knight, and I was just like, man.
Well, it definitely divided a lot of fans, and I guess, as you mentioned, if you do look and critique, I guess, how he portrays the multiple identities of Mark Spector, it isn't, for me as well, it isn't really fleshed out that much. I really did enjoy the cinematography. For a fan film, I did not expect that kind of level. And the aesthetic, as you're saying, that noir kind of feel, I think he encapsulated really well. I can see where you're going with the kind of video game kind of thing. I thought the fight scenes were great, and he made the choices with the costume, and with Mark, the actor himself. I think he did like a decent job. People were kind of put off by his ponytail. I'm not too fussed with that as well. But as far as the more the meat and bones of Moon Knight, it wasn't as fleshed out as I would have thought, I guess. But I
liked the little Bushman tease at the end. I thought that was cool. But I think, again, like I said, the ideas were there, the heart was there. I think maybe if they had a little bigger budget to spend and maybe cast a wider net as far as actors were concerned, maybe get somebody a little different. The ponytail, frankly, wasn't even a big thing for me. I mean, it wasn't. I wouldn't put that in my list of top 5 complaints. It's more like one of those little niggling things that just like, oh, and by the way, lose the ponytail. But there were other issues that I had with the film aside from the ponytail, so that one didn't faze me as much. Yeah,
I really do hope Caden works on another one. I mean, he has said himself as well, he's a big Moon Knight fan. So I'd really
absolutely. I'd love to see something else.
Yeah, and what did you think of the writing, like the script itself? Like there was only one or two. There was actually one scene I could really think of off the top of my head that the dialogue sounded really a little dodgy. It was those two dudes at the back of the cab, and And he goes, "Oh, should we be speaking about this, in front of this guy, in front of the cabbie, And I thought, well, that's a bit hammy. But yeah, what did you think of the writing?
I like I said, I thought that it was pretty solid for the most part, given that it was more of a noir type film.
Yeah.
Again, I thought it was a little ham-fisted at times, particularly the bit in the cab. I thought it was just too on the nose, and it sort of took me out for a second of the story. But again, if that's the type of story for Moon Knight that you're going for, that dark and gritty, he definitely got a lot of the tone down.
Yes.
So I just think maybe, again, just a little more finesse on some of the script and some of the ideas. Which, like I said, I gave it a 7. I give it a 7 out of 10. So it's there. And also, I think just from a larger perspective, the fact that this got such buzz that it did. I mean, it was on Sci-Fi.
Yes.
There was numerous articles that were covering this.
Massive exposure.
Really speaks to the passion for and the desire to see the character done in live action, because I think, anybody can put together a Spider-Man fan film or a Superman fan film and okay, that's nice, add it to the pile. But Moon Knight is, as you and I well know, is one of those characters that is not majorly well known, but those who do know him love him. And so I think the passion that we Loonies had for the film, and the fact that Caden made this as a love letter to the fans, and that we said, "Oh my God, this is amazing! We need this." Hopefully, somewhere Kevin Feige hears this and says, "Let's do something with the character." And
Oh, for sure.
Maybe in phase 4 or moving forward after the Fox merger is done. I don't know. I don't know what
I
what
mean,
the situation is.
I think he's proven in a fan film that regardless of the choices of the black coat and stuff like that, that he can look kick-ass on film, and it can be done. Without potentially, depends on how you treat the costume, it could look really kind of cheesy. And I think he actually managed to show a bit of groundedness in it. So if anything, I'd give it about 7 or 8. I really did enjoy it, and like I said, I really hope that he does pursue maybe a second one, and if he's happy to take on board the feedback from the fans, would love to see it. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, anyway, Anthony, speaking of films, we are here in our Moon and Stars segment because we are looking and focusing on your script for the Moon Knight, for a Moon Knight film. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the actual script itself, just a bit of background. And I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you, Anthony, was, apart from obviously your obvious love for the character, what kind of generated this idea to write a script, a Moon Knight script?
This was going back to about 2010, and there were so the MCU was still in phase 1, and it was still in its very early stages. I think at this point maybe Iron Man 2 had just been released, and there were reports on a lot of the websites, Comic Book Resources, Comic Book Movie, etc., that said Marvel was listening to pitches from writers for some of their C and D list characters for smaller, lower budget films in like the $20 to $40 million range. And I know that Power Pack was mentioned, Cloak and Dagger was one of them, Iron Fist. And so they were looking for, I guess, smaller films that weren't necessarily going to be the big, high-level Avenger name blockbusters. And Moon Knight was a character that had appealed to me. Again, I'd known just a little bit about him, and so I said, here's a low-level guy. I mean, I think as much as we love him, we can agree he's C-list. Yep. And so I said, here's a guy who would fit perfectly. And when I read that Volume 1, Issue 1, because I wanted to get a little more background on the character, I read that first issue and I said, this is an origin story. This entire first issue is an origin story in and of itself. But what I noticed when I read it was that, and certainly you've read the book many times yourself, is the fact that he becomes Stephen and Jake is glossed over in the book. It's just, and he wakes up, he's resurrected by Khonshu, and he returns to America, and he becomes Jake Lockley and Stephen Grant, and now he's Moon Knight.
Yeah.
And let's move on. And I said, the problem with that is that may have worked for audiences reading the book in 1980. Mm-hmm. That's not going to work for film audiences in back then, like 2010, 2011. And so I said, I have to find a reason for this, and I have to find a way to depict the transition in a way that makes sense. And really early on with some of the stuff that was going on in the MCU, the first Iron Man was very, very grounded and very realistic. Mm-hmm. There's really nothing fantastical in that movie outside of just some of the technology that was used. But literally everything in that first Iron Man is very rooted in reality. And even the Incredible Hulk film was very realistic.
Yep.
As realistic as a Hulk film can obviously be. Mm-hmm. And so the MCU at that point didn't really have anything fantastical. And so one of the things that I was hoping to do was broaden the scope just a bit and introduce a little bit more of the fantasy with respect to Khonshu and so on, but still give it the grounded realism. And why would someone create these multiple identities and these multiple roles that they play? And so I began talking to my best friend, Doc Issues, the co-host of Capes on the Couch with me, because obviously he's a mental health professional. And so I sort of sat him down and I asked him a lot of questions about, what leads to this and what could trigger this and blah, blah, blah. And because I wanted to root the psychology of the film in a sort of realism. And so I wanted to make it understandable why Mark would have this break and why he would introduce the identities and the notion that the identities weren't just names that he used, they were individual personalities. And this had been alluded to for many years throughout the books, that each of the roles, it's not just a name that he plays, and when he's Jake, he puts on the fake mustache, and when he's Steven, he takes it off. Like there's a mental switch that happens, and I really wanted to portray that realistically, or as realistically as I could, while still maintaining, trueness to the character. Yeah. So that became sort of one of the driving factors for me.
Yeah, right.
And just trying to figure out a way to make that look realistic and make it a psychological revenge film, because really that first issue is all about him getting vengeance on Bushman, and he's, the Moon's Knight of Vengeance. And
yes.
So that really became the focal point of the film, is not just the vengeance, but why he needed to take vengeance and what Khonshu's influence was having on him, and and all of those psychological factors. Yeah,
I mean the scope of the script is quite vast, I think, which is really great, because it obviously we all know the origin. It spans continents, and it actually, we'll get to it a bit later, but it actually predates your script, predates a lot of things that happen later on in the Moon Knight comics, which is really, really cool to see. I mean, you must have been looking at those later issues by the likes of Lemire.
Lemire. Swear to God, when I was reading some of those Lemire books, I had to put them down because I was so angry, in a good way, that he took so many of my ideas and he put them into a comic book, and he did them better than I did. Like so much of that stuff with Khonshu and the Other Void. I didn't call it the Other Void. I didn't use that name, but that notion, I had that in my scripts from 2010, 2011. And the notion of, Mark having the imaginary friend when he was younger, and then Lemire did it when, in the book, and I would read these books literally every week because again I had the subscription, and I would read them every month. And God damn it. He stole my idea. He didn't know he stole it from me, but he stole my idea, and he did it better than I did. So
so you have your script on one hand, and you got Lemire's coming, you got the other gun. What the? Come on!
I got the book in the other. And
but
God damn it!
I mean, apart from those as well, I was thinking as well the military aspects. I mean, watching we've been blessed with 2 seasons of The Punisher on Netflix, and that's very heavily, to do with the military. And anyway, so what I thought that was very kind of innovative and hadn't been seen in the Marvel Universe so far, and especially in the 2010 era, because we're talking obviously Tony Stark and Incredible Hulk, but is that military side, that kind of grunt, that side of things, and in your script really talks to. There's a lot of, specific military jargon, which kind of really adds a lot to it as well. But yeah, it's I guess from that as well. Had you written any other scripts, or had you had dealings with other pros that have informed you in how to write the Moon Knight script?
No. Literally that first draft, which I wrote by hand on notebooks. I still have all of the original notebooks with all of my notes,
cool.
And the storylines, because I have it mapped out as a trilogy, because not just the notion of, oh, hey, let's make a trilogy for a franchise purpose, but there is an overarching story from one film to the next that really addresses Mark's take and how he moves forward. Particularly the second film, I think would have been very interesting for me to write because of what it meant. I really wanted, in the second film, break down the essence of who Moon Knight is. In the first film, we introduce him to the fans. In the second film, I wanted him to lose everything. I really wanted to make it a film where you watch it and you go, how could anyone come back from this? And how can a hero come back from this? And I think because it makes for a much more triumphant story and a much more you earn your happy ending.
Yep.
And so I was going to have him lose. He was going to lose Marlene. He was going to lose his powers, because in my version of the film, he does start off with the moon-based powers.
Yep.
He would lose. His father would die, and that would come into play. He would gain and lose Midnight Man, or a Midnight as his sidekick.
Yep.
And so there was that sense of betrayal there. He would basically lose everything, and yet he would rise as a hero. And so that to me was going to be something very fun, because in the unlikely, miraculous event that I managed to make it to Marvel Studios and pitch them the story, I figured, while I'm here, let me pitch you a full trilogy
cool.
of storylines. So
that's great. I really really appreciate these large brushstrokes that you paint over this trilogy, because look, let's face it, that to me is the best sort of journey for a hero. It would piss off a lot of comic book fans, like we've seen it before with Iron Fist and stuff, where the writers have taken huge decisions, but to create this sort of journey that you're describing, Anthony, and it does rub a lot of the, I don't know, how shall I say, a lot more of the traditional fans up the wrong way, but that just sounds exciting, to have Moon Knight kind of rise above it all. That would work really well.
And then the third film would be based largely on the Blood Brothers storyline. I was going to introduce Randall in the third one.
Punisher in there as well.
Well, it's funny. At the time when I was writing it, because I know Punisher was obviously involved in the original, but I did not know what the rights were. And I think even when I originally wrote it, Punisher was not involved, or they didn't have the rights to Punisher, so I didn't want to write him into the story. And so actually I introduced Tigra in the second film.
Oh, yeah.
as a fun foil for Moon Knight. And because I wanted to play off the notion that she was very comfortable in her skin and being a hero.
Yes.
And really revels in that role, and Mark did not.
Yes. A bit of a nod to the West Coast Avengers, yeah, as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so Tigra was going to play a lot of the Punisher-esque role in the Blood Brother storyline.
Cool.
And to follow up on some of the stuff that had been done in the second film. And then obviously, of course, Marvel Studios got the rights back. So, and then I stopped working on it for years. So, it wasn't until we started talking about this podcast and everything. And I said, oh, yeah, by the way, I wrote a script. And you said, well, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
I said, oh, Jesus, I better try and, rekindle the creative flame, so to speak, on some of those things. Yeah. So, but I still have not gotten around to actually writing anything for the second and third films, other than just a brief synopsis, like literally just one page, like this, and then this, and these are the things that happen. Yeah, nothing more than that.
And that's kind of how it all starts, as well, right? I mean, that's that's how you kind of started this script with the synopsis. That usually comes. I don't know. I'm just wondering as someone who writes scripts, do you just map it out like that first, just a synopsis, and then you kind of break it into acts or whatever, and then expand out on those acts?
Yeah, basically that's how it was. I came up with very broad strokes for each of the three films, and then I said, well, let me start on the first one, obviously first and foremost, and then that one became more of a treatment. Yep. And then from the treatment to the script, and then breaking it down. And it's funny to look back at the one-page synopsis that I have for the first film and see some of the things that have stayed throughout each iteration of the script, and then how far it's changed and progressed. Because as I'm writing it, and I know it sounds like I want to stab myself for saying this because it sounds so trite and hackneyed, but the characters tell me where they want to go, and the story tells me what it wants to do.
Oh, okay.
Which just like gag me with a spoon for even saying that. but it's true. Like you're writing it and you just go, like as you get more comfortable writing and as you get more comfortable understanding and appreciating the characters, you understand what would be an organic choice for them to make, and it just progresses from there.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, we've got to get to discussing this the script in depth soon. So one final thing I guess I'll ask you, just with the background of the script before we head into it, fan casting then, Anthony. Had you any ideas or preconceptions of who you'd like to see in the roles of? Let me just check out a few there for you. A few odd ones. Obviously Mark, Frenchie. How about Bo Olsen or the likes of Carmen? Any ideas there?
It's funny, when writing the script, I really envisioned them as comic book characters, and and so when I wasn't seeing real people necessarily in my head, I was able to visualize certain scenes in a very cinematic fashion. There were certain moments that I can still to this day, if I could take my visualization and project it to you on a screen, you would go, holy shit, that's awesome. One particular is Bushman killing Dr. Alroon. Yeah. That scene, that moment has literally never changed from draft one, because that was one sequence where I go, I nailed this, and I don't have to do anything else to it. Dr. Alroon I actually saw as Sam Neill. I don't know why.
Good. That'd be very good. Yes.
Sort of playing on, I guess, the Alan Grant type story. Okay. Type role. I never saw anybody as Mark necessarily. The only one, and of course I would have had to have access to a time machine, is, and I don't remember the actor's name, he's on Hawaii Five-0.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He's Steve on Hawaii Five-0, I think, but like 10 years ago, because I think he's a little old now.
Yeah, right.
But 10 years ago, I think he would have made a fantastic Mark Spector. But again, I didn't really see the characters in real life. I'll rephrase that. I saw them in my head as real people, but not as anyone identifiable. They were real people that looked like the comic book characters.
I know what you mean. So you're just imagining it, but there's someone who has the brown hair, the scar on the eyebrow.
Yeah, exactly. Marlene is, a blonde, and we can get into some of the things about Marlene, because I really wanted to try and beef up her storyline and more than just eye candy in the script. Yeah, but I didn't see them as real people or real identifiable identifiable actors.
Okay, fair enough. Just to throw it out there, since you said Sam Neill, which I think is a fantastic casting. Doctor, how do you pronounce it? Al Rayon?
Alrayon, that's how I've always said it. It's an interesting,
it's a very interesting
combination. It's the AU.
Yeah,
it's an interesting combination of vowel sounds there.
True. I would just I'd say Charles Dance. Do you know him? Is it Charles Dance?
Yes.
English.
Yep.
I reckon
Tywin Lannister.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I reckon he'd be pretty good. Slap a beard and moustache on him. And also, just finally as well, it's slightly ironic, I think, because you had written such a good scene with Bushman taking on and dispatching of Marlene's dad. But it's funny because in the comics, like we all know, and we pointed it out on our show, there are about 3 different versions that he dies. He gets bitten in the neck. I think he gets stabbed in the Lemire run. And he gets his neck snapped in another run. So that's always changed throughout the history. But I'm glad you stuck with the teeth, because that's the most terrifying, I think.
Well, yeah, and because I wanted to really demonstrate the brutality of Bushman as a lethal foe. Because in my version of the film, he is the avatar of Seth.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, very interesting concept. Hold on to that, Anthony. Let's dive right into it. Loonies, buckle up. Get your popcorn out, settle back, and get ready for this. We'll come back after a short break, and Anthony and I will return to discuss his script.
Hello, I'm Anthony.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
And we're hosts of Capes on the Couch, the podcast where comics get counseling.
Superheroes don't always get to go home happy. That's where we come in.
We offer psychiatric and mental health analysis of comic book characters.
So check us out at capesonthecouch.live and across all social media platforms at Capes on the Couch.
Yes, welcome back. Loony listeners, you're listening to Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast. I have very special guest here, Anthony Sytko from Capes on the Couch. He's also the author. Is it an author when you write a script? Yeah, an author of...
I guess, the writer.
The writer of a Moon Knight film script, which we are discussing tonight on our Moon and Stars segment. So, Anthony, I guess we should really go through this this script and have a look. Very very cool. I'm just wondering how we should go through this. Okay, the first thing I'd say, obviously, opening shot in Chicago. We have a pretty quick introduction of the costumed Moon Knight, though we don't see him for quite a bit after that. But it was nice to actually drop in and start with bang. You got Moon Knight. They're doing what he's meant to do as a superhero, right?
Yeah, I wanted to start with him in the costume, just that brief bit, because so much of the film plays with his mental state, and also because we don't really see Moon Knight in the film until much, much later on, that I just wanted to give it as a brief tease, and it's not really a fourth wall breaking like a Deadpool where he's narrating his own film, but it's because he's in his own head that he's sort of talking to himself. But we use that as a sort of a cheat to get the audience sort of hooked in, like, who's this guy and why is he talking to himself?
Yeah.
So that was sort of where I came with it. And also I wanted to touch on the fact that I went with Chicago because we've seen so many characters in New York. And even though I live in New Jersey and I literally grew up in like 20, 30 minutes away from New York, I just got a little tired of it. And I said, there is some basis for Chicago in there from the books. So I said, let's just root it. This way he's elsewhere. He's totally isolated from the rest of, the mainline Avengers, which I think, frankly, is how he would want it.
Yeah.
And so I just thought if I set it in Chicago, it just gives it a little different flavor and it isolates him further and establishes that he's technically in the MCU, but he's very much his own dark corner of it. And so he's literally physically isolated from everyone else. Yeah,
and I think I think it's a smart move as well, because he is is very lone wolf, isn't he? So, that was a great choice. Also, and then we fade into a congregation, and we get the introduction of Mark Spector's dad. And you start playing here, Anthony, with the family dynamics, a bit of an introduction of Mark, a bit of history telling, but also the dynamics between him and his father, him and his brother Randall. This was quite interesting, I thought, as well. And it we all know from history as well that was it Elias Spector?
Elias, yep.
Yeah, he obviously he kind of disowns Mark, doesn't he, in the comics? But in the comics, though, he's more of a pacifist. Over here, we see him quite violent towards his sons.
Well, again, one of the reasons why Elias is the way that he is because I wanted to root Mark's psychotic breaks in some semblance of reality. And so when I was talking to Doc Issues about this, he needed to suffer some sort of trauma to undergo the psychotic break. And I wanted to show very early on that Mark has not been right in the head for some time. Yeah. And the best way that I thought to do that was to show Elias as an abusive alcoholic who put on a face for the congregation that, oh, he's this loving, wonderful rabbi. And I know that it is a break from the comics largely, but, and even in the original script, he was not the abusive person that he was. Yeah. But I still wanted to show that he was, responsible for Mark ultimately becoming who he is. And that comes into play later on. But I needed to root that early on so that you understand how Mark gets from A to B. Yeah,
and I think there's a lot of opportunity with Elias. It hasn't been touched upon enough in the comics, and so to actually understand him a bit more in relation to his sons is a good thing. And as we mentioned, very different from the comics, but no less impact, I think, with him being quite physical. It's funny enough as well, we get a parallel. I'm going to parallel this with the Bemis run, Anthony. I know you're a massive fan. But in the Bemis run, we get a treatment of Elias there as well. Something slightly different, but we see Bemis trying to flesh out Elias Spector. So in that sense, in the comics towards the end, I'm going to pluck out a number. I think it's 194. We see Elias actually has a mental issue himself, which I guess is maybe an indirect explanation of Mark Spector. So I guess I just found that interesting how you both touched upon it, which is...
Yeah, no, definitely. I thought that was one of the better aspects of the Bemis run. Was giving a little more flesh as a character to Elias. He's always just sort of been, very, very one-dimensional in Mark's past.
I think a lot of characters in Moon Knight's kind of corner is victim to that as well. I mean, Randall, we've discussed this on the show when he appeared. He has 3 major chapters in the Moon Knight canon. Very, I don't know, maybe either underused or just not really fully realised here. What I like in your script is that we do get an immediate dynamic between Mark and Randall, and there's nice kind of brotherly rivalry there. And for fans that do know what happens, we know there's an ominous outcome as they both grow up later on.
Yeah, in an earlier draft, he actually had a physical altercation with Randall when they were adults, and Randall really sort of takes it out on Mark. And I made Mark, I think in the comics, Mark is the older brother, but here I made him the younger brother, but he's physically more overpowering, and Randall resents him for that. And so in an earlier draft, I had Randall really take it out on, I didn't need you to protect me, blah, blah, blah. And they get into a fight, and Mark beats 7 Shades out of him. Yeah. And I guess the end tease for the first film was going to be Randall bandaged up in a hospital, and he attacks one of the nurses. Yeah. So
cool.
To get out, and he's got the revenge on his mind. So a little tie in there to hatchet and so on, and sort of teasing the third film. So it sort of alludes to that. But I took it out because it just seemed forced, and it was taking time away from. It didn't add anything to the progression. It was just, oh, hey, let's have a fight here because it's been quiet for a while. Yeah. So,
but I like that actually. That what you're using there, Randall being the older, getting beaten up by his younger brother, because that just opens up some cans of worms, doesn't it? Like the shame, and you can understand the resentment building in Randall. I think that's a really interesting idea. But yeah.
Again, it was the idea, but I couldn't find a hook for it,
sure.
And it just seemed, like I said, like it was taken away from other parts of the script, and you only have you're moving forward at 24 frames a second whether you want to or not, and so you have a limited amount of time.
God, that must be so hard to I mean, what ends up in the cutting room floor, so to speak, must be hard to, like, so many cool ideas. Anyway, so we move on to a shot of the schoolyard and a young Mark, and this is the introduction where we get introduction of Jake, and things aren't as it seems. So we get the imaginary Jake here, as you said, a really good idea, and also tying in with Mark getting bullied as well.
Yep, and that again was another idea that Jeff Lemire did better than I did. When he did it in the books, that Mark brings his friend up to his room, and then Elias walks in and he's like, "Who are you talking to?" "I'm showing my toys." Who's there? And Mark is by himself. So that's another point where I was reading, I go, God damn it, Jeff Lemire.
Yeah. But what I really like about this, though, as well, is that Mark does not take a step back from the bullies, and he actually ends up kind of beating them. So we get a bit of a window into the future of him being a very accomplished fighter, so to speak. But I love the descriptions here, Anthony. Plastic cutlery all over the place on the bullies. So really, really cool stuff. Then, actually, Anthony, we go to another scene. This is what I really wanted to ask you. We get some new characters here, or a new character, in the guise of Carmen. Now, that's right, isn't it? I'm sure she's not part of, I can't remember in Moon Knight canon.
No, she's very much just a creation that I used for myself. Mm-hmm. I needed, unfortunately, and I hate to do it because I'm not normally someone who just likes to create characters and throw them away, but I needed something for Mark Spector, Marine Staff Sergeant Mark Spector, and I needed some character to show the fact that he could have a relationship. He really is difficult to get through to, and so Carmen was that love interest, so to speak. She really only is in that one scene. Yeah. Unfortunately, I hated the notion of giving her such a short shrift as a character, because I think she could be a lot more. But unfortunately, it was just I needed something to show that part of Mark that was there, so that when it appears later, you don't go, "Where did this come from?" It had to be organic, and it had to fit in the story. So I needed some. Unfortunately, I hate to say this as a man, but I needed a female character there, and that's who I came up with. And I tried to make her as fleshed out of a character as I possibly could in the one scene that I wrote her in. Yeah. But otherwise, she doesn't serve much of a purpose outside of that scene. But
yeah. Oh, I mean, it was a tight enough scene there as well. So I mean, that's good. She seems quite capable herself of doing stuff, but they basically have just a dialogue, and there's a bit of history there between the two, and then we get to
and it was more alluding to the past with Mark, with Elias, where we find out that Elias is sober now, and he wants the forgiveness, and Mark is not willing to forgive his dad for everything that he did. That's
right. Yeah, that's right. What was it? She says, "I didn't know he was dead," or something, and he goes, "No, he's dead to me." Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you told me he was dead. Well, he's dead to me.
Yeah.
So
we cut to, so this is obviously Mark's obviously grown up from the schoolyard. He's in military training, and we get another. He goes. He kind of gets assessed by one of his superior officers, who seem impressed by his stuff. But it all looks good.
Crossfire.
Yeah, yes. I thought so. Is it Crossfire? William Cross, right?
It is Crossfire. That's why he says I'd give my right eye for for, 10 guys like you. There was a little Easter egg in there.
Yeah,
I threw that in.
Man, I was thinking it was, and I was thinking, no, hang on, that's Darren, but Darren's his brother, right?
Darren is his brother.
Yeah.
Yep, Yellow Jacket from the Ant-Man film.
Yes.
So, and of course, this was written many years prior to Ant-Man. So once that came out, I was like, oh man, they're brothers, but blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I
thought
it
all ties together.
Oh man, I had visions of Crossfire from the Nick Spencer run of Ant-Man when I was reading this, and I just kept on, when I was reading it, going, is it him? Is it him? And and I convinced myself it wasn't.
That's Crossfire.
Awesome stuff. But anyway, that kind of goes pear-shaped at the end. There seems a bit of... he pushes Mark's... the wrong buttons, let's say that. He starts talking about family. He begins with, saying, Mark, you're very accomplished, you've done this, but we are worried about your discipline. And so that doesn't end well, and it doesn't end well for Mark to, I guess, further his career.
He goes off on Cross.
He goes off, he certainly does, and screams at it. He has to be dragged away, kicking and screaming. So we're starting to get a really good idea of Mark at the moment now. We're starting to get a lot of information from him, from the story, which is really good. And it's all kind of rolling at the moment. Straight after that, so then we get into, I guess, you could say Volume 1, Issue 1, him as a mercenary. Is hang on.
Yeah. He's this also comes into some of the stuff from the Child of Mark Spector, which is from the Mark Spector Moon Knight run.
Boscoverde,
we introduced Bo Olsen and Boscoverde and Raposa and I used this scene to introduce Frenchie. This is where they meet, and they do not start off as friends. Frenchie is the derivative name, so I wanted to give that a reason. He's like, I'm Jean-Paul Duchamp, and Mark is like, whatever you say, Frenchie.
Yeah. That was really good. And I like the way that you fleshed out Bo Olsen, actually, because there's that little story in The Trial of Mark Spector where you get the sense of this. But I found Bo turns out to be quite a sympathetic character. That they kind of they kind of... have fun with it. They basically count their body count, I made it a game for them that see how many people they can kill throughout the course of the attack. And the dead president's line comes back, in a sort of ironic fashion at the end there. That they're only interested in dead presidents. And then they get the dead president, but it costs Bo his life. Yeah, he very much reminded me as almost kind of very kind of cowboy, because he's so just like, this is danger, and this is what we get, and I'm sure I'm going to die. He's very not blasé, but he kind of accepts it. And I got the sense that he and Mark were a lot closer, obviously, as you mentioned, a lot closer than Frenchie. So I like the idea that Mark had a best friend, had a good mate there, but we find out later on he's kind of formed this friendship with Frenchie, which is really cool.
But they don't start off as besties.
No, not at all. Exactly. So I like that kind of grower aspect for them, and so this pretty much is similar to the comics with Mark shooting Raposa. No, Ricardo.
Raposa,
Raposa.
Not Raposa. No. I forget that the president's name. No, Raposa's the guy who hires him.
Yeah, Ricardo.
I forget the.
Sorry. Yeah.
Dominguez, maybe. I don't know. I don't remember.
Dominguez.
I don't remember. I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, Dominguez and his wife Carmilla. So that obviously creates. So what happens? Mark shoots him. Thinks he's going to go for a gun. Turns out he's pulling out a photo of his family. That would just lay massive guilt on Mark. And again, just another little piece of the puzzle for Mark Spector. So we go there. There's some really cool action scenes in here. I'm just going through this as we speak, Anthony. I really like the and again, so you use the term double taps and all that. Very I'm assuming that's just like 2 quick shots, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just boom, boom.
Yeah.
If you saw Zombieland, it's always double tap is one of the rules.
And there was a terminology here for there is of the like a silencer, like poof, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Cool.
Again, understanding that silencers don't really work that way, but everyone in movies expects them to, so I might as well just play with that trope. I hate it, but I needed it, so.
Yeah. So then anyway, we then fade out and fade to Africa 1 year later. And so we have Mark has moved on, and we see that he's still buddies with Frenchie, and they are talking to an unseen man, and we all know Loonies who this fella would be, none other than Raoul, as mentioned in the script. Razor sharp fangs as he smirks. So this is again we've seen this in the origin, in the Doug Mensch run, in the Jeff Lemire run as well, and to an extent in the Houston run with the origin. But yeah, again, so this I'm just going through this, Anthony. This pretty much sticks to the origin as told in the comics. We see them not too happy with Bushman, and we see Bushman's posse turn up at the archaeological dig with Marlene and Dr. Al Rayon.
Yeah, that one, that part of it, I really didn't think I needed to change too much. Obviously, just sort of actionize it and add some dialogue. What I wanted to do, though, was to make really flesh out sort of the dynamic between Marlene and her father, and indicate that it is not, they get along, but it's not really like a happy sort of relationship, that it's very stilted.
Yep.
And I really wanted to demonstrate that through a couple of just the sequence, because in the backstory that I had written, Peter left Marlene when she was very young because he was off on the digs, and Marlene always wanted to be close to her father, and so she studied archaeology in an attempt to gain that relationship with him, and they can talk archaeology, but that's it.
Yeah, I like that aspect. They're very comfortable just talking archaeology, but anything veering away from that, it gets quite awkward. So
exactly.
Yeah. So so we get the introduction of Marlene and her dad, and similar to the comics, we get the ultimate altercation between Bushman, Frenchie, Dr. Al Rayon, with. There's a bit of description on the dagger. So I know you've done a lot of background work with Egyptology for this, Anthony. So there's Dr. Aaron talking about the dagger, and that's what he wants to use on Bushman. But Mark actually alerts Bushman to the oncoming attack, and Bushman dispatches of Peter, as well as the rest of the workers that won't follow his cause.
Yeah, he's basically, you have one chance to follow me, and, follow me or die. You're not going to follow me? All right, take him out. Yeah. And they, his men just, and they drill everybody down, and then that's it. And that's the final moment that sets Mark off. And there's that scene earlier where Mark is talking with Frenchie, and ever since the incident in Bosque Verde, he's had that crisis of conscience, and he really doesn't know why it is that he's continuing to do this. And so seeing Bushman kill Dr. Al Rayon and everyone else, that's the straw that broke the camel's back, and he's like, that's it, I've had enough.
Yeah, and absolutely. So he kind of goes up against Bushman. He does well, actually. From how you wrote it, it looked like it was kind of overpowering Bushman. It was not only because of a butt, what do you call it, a gun butt to the head.
He's basically, he could take out Bushman one-on-one, but he's not given that opportunity, and he's sort of ambushed from behind, and then Bushman, knocks him out and leaves him for dead, and in the middle of the desert, and we all know the rest.
And so exactly. And so this follows the true to the comics. So he, he's left in the desert. He arrives at the temple where Marlene and Jalad, her assistant, I guess, are at. But there's an interesting scene here, Anthony, with Mark talking to Khonshu, and this is all before. I guess this is the proposition that Khonshu gives Mark. To resurrect him or not, he can go to hell if he wants, and he says he makes no bones about it. He says Bo's going to be down there, but he says you can go there, or you can help me. And there's a bit of an explanation of Khonshu. Really interesting. I love this Egypt mythology. It's kind of fleshed out with the how do you pronounce that?
Heliopolitans.
Heliopolitans, yes.
Well, because when I was doing my research on this, I read about the actual Egyptian mythology. And so all of that stuff that I talk about with Seth and Khonshu and Ra and so on, that is all the actual Egyptian mythology.
Yeah.
That story about what his body is dispersed, into 1,000 pieces, and his lover has to find them and bring them back together to resurrect him.
Yeah.
That is all based on the actual Egyptian mythology, because originally I had come up with an original story for what the characters were and what their reasons were. And then I read the original mythology and I said, this is way better than anything I could come up with. Why don't I just use this, since it's rooted in actual Egyptian mythology? So
Very smart move. Yeah, it works
so
really
I said,
well.
let me work with this and give the characters some motivation there. So all the stuff between Khonshu and Seth and the little twist that I gave it was that Bushman is Seth's avatar,
Yes.
which gives further reason for Mark to go after Bushman, because it's not just Mark wanting revenge on Bushman, but it's Khonshu needing to defeat Seth.
Yeah, no, I think that works really well, and that's a really good twist on it. And the other big twist, which you mentioned earlier as well. So what happens? Mark says, "Okay, let's do it," and he gets resurrected. Khonshu actually gives him these moon-based powers. So we know that was in Fist of Khonshu. The comics. Why did he choose to give him, is this something just to set him apart, or was it an influence from the 2008 to 10 MCU films to do something a bit out there, or?
It was a little bit of the early MCU films wanting to give him some powers.
Yep.
It was also just some influence from the comics, because I knew that he had some comic based powers, and I thought it would have been fun to play with, because most of the characters that we had seen up to that point, and even now, they have their powers, and their powers are, I don't want to say static, but they either have powers or they don't. With the moon, and the way that I play with it is if the moon is covered, he doesn't. It impacts his abilities. So the moon has to be shining in order for him to get those powers. But as the moon grows in phase and waxes and wanes, his strength level increases or decreases. And I wanted to play with that to further add to the notion that he doesn't really know how strong he's going to be or how effective he's going to be, and that's going to have an impact on his mental state at any given point.
Yeah. And it's a great. It's used to good effect towards the end as well, with the clouds interfering with his abilities, which is really cool.
Exactly. That's when I came up with the idea. I said, I want him to have the upper hand and then lose it, and and go back and forth.
It's kind of like
so it's not just a one-sided.
Yeah, it's kind of like the kryptonite, of it. You've got to give him a bit of an Achilles heel. Yeah, and so that was a good way to do it. So he shows Marlene he's resurrected, and he literally busts out of the temple, testing his new powers. So he's set his sights on Bushman. Then we move to, I'm just having a look here. We see Bushman here.
Bushman is celebrating the fact that he won and he's controlling everything. Mark shows up and basically blows up the depot, and he almost ends it right there. But of course, we're only 45 minutes into the movie, so we know it can't end here. Yeah. So we just have to have that little tease. So he almost beats him, but then he hears Marlene, and Frenchie goes to grab Marlene to protect her. She screams, thinking she's under attack. Mm-hmm. Mark goes to protect her, and Bushman gets away. So, I know it's sort of quote unquote cheap, but you have to have that little tease there, because you can't just have that sort of climactic conclusion, that big battle that early on. So
no,
I have to give the people a little bit of a tease.
Exactly, and you want the two big characters to meet. At some point, without having to wait all the way to the end. So it's a nice, as you say, a nice little tease. So then we move to Mark Spector's home, and it's just Mark, Frenchie, and Marlene talking. It's Mark basically describing, and this is the thing, like describing that whole, similar to, I guess, Thor with the gods and aliens, and just the others thinking it's quite incredulous. I like the mention of the Avengers here as well. That kind of like, you're like, hey, that's cool. A nice little tie-in to the greater Marvel universe. But yeah, that was just, I guess, him getting Frenchie and Marlene on board with what he's doing.
Well, he's trying, and they're not really all that particularly interested. And then something that I didn't get a chance to flesh out as much as I would have liked, and it was something that I was working on for the next draft, is giving Marlene a little more of a reason to stay, but Mark doesn't want her there, so they don't start off as lovers. It's just, she's there because she wants revenge on Bushman for killing her father, and Mark is like, you're not really of any help to me, and she's like, well, just let me stay at least for a little bit. I don't have anything else. My father just died. Yeah. So...
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. For sure. That's and so they test Mark's kind of skills, and also I guess forming Jake, the cabbie. So the other personas are starting to come into play. They were thinking of what was it before? Wasn't it cabbie? They were thinking newsman, like a.
Yeah, that was a little shot at Superman.
Yeah.
It's like, if everyone's going to notice if I'm covering the story, but I'm not really there.
Yeah.
So
I thought of Superman straight away there.
That's exactly that was it. That was a little shot at Clark Kent, whom I love. But
yeah, for sure. And then there's also a chauffeur, which kind of leads organically to cabbie, because let's face it, and rightly so, cabbies, they are the ears of the city, aren't they? They
yes,
know
even
stuff.
if people say, shouldn't we be saying this in front of this guy? Who's he going to tell? Blah blah blah.
Yeah. Exactly. And Mark shows his his affection and his need for Marlene to be there with him. So there's a bit of a they kind of solidify their relationship a bit here, saying that he grounds her.
Well,
she
it's funny.
grounds him.
That part is from the fifth draft, and that's when I realized that I was forcing it too soon. So that's the part, and I mentioned this to you, sort of offline before we were prepping this, that from this point on in the script, this is from the fifth draft. This is not from the latest version. So from here on out, my plan is more based in the synopsis for the sixth draft, in which Marlene is more of just, she's there and she endears herself to Mark. It's almost like I don't want to say like a Beauty and the Beast type scenario, but he's very rough and she's he's here to protect me, or not that he's here to protect me, but I have worth and value aside from just being an archaeologist. And there's a beautiful scene that I would have written later on where she is the one who makes the costume for him. But we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah. So anyway, there is a montage there. So where they go, so Mark goes to where does he go? He goes to the Salvation Army first. He kind of gets all his stuff together to become a cabbie. He sets up his, I guess, disguise. They look at getting a mansion, Grant Mansion, so setting up his identities. And then there's a little bit here. You mentioned she's working on a silvery hooded cape there for him as well. Yeah. So, and you've got Frenchie working on the helicopter as well. So their kind of plan is all coming together.
Well, then, like I said, for the next draft, I was basically going to have him just start off very basically. He was, he wasn't going to start off as Steven just yet. So at this point, he's Moon Knight and he's Jake. Yeah. And this is all from the synopsis, that he gets the ID and the hack license and the cab, and then he starts off just as Moon Knight and he's Jake, and then so he picks up a businessman, and it's funny that we were just talking about some of the dialogue in the fan film, because that's sort of what happens. I was gonna work on drafting it that there's a businessman talking about a fundraiser where he's going to swindle some money, and he doesn't care about saying anything in front of the cabbie because who the hell's he going to tell? He doesn't know who I am, and he couldn't do anything anyway. Yeah. So Mark shows up at the event, and he's like, he gets rid of the mustache and he shows up. He bluffs his way inside and he says, "Oh, I'm Stephen Grant and I own Grant Corp." And I have the one gag where the couple.
Yes, that's right.
The couple that he had brought there, and she's like, "Isn't that the cabbie?" Yeah, that's nice. And last week you thought the waiter looked like Barry Manilow or whatever it was. So
right, yeah.
just a sort of a little fun joke there.
Yeah, no, for sure. That was good. Sorry, I lost my place here. So so we go through that. So with him, Mark is Grant. So I'm just trying to move up here.
Are you in the script or the synopsis?
Oh no, I'm in the script.
Okay, I was going to say at this point the I wouldn't go because the script changes now based on the synopsis because I came up with a whole bunch of new ideas that I hadn't had a chance to write out. So the synopsis at this point forward is more where I would see the story going had I been more creatively inclined.
Oh, okay. So have you got the synopsis in front of you there as well?
Yeah, I have the synopsis in front of me. So at this point, he works his way over to the businessman, and he corners him in a room, and then the businessman's fiancée shows up, who Mark doesn't care much for until she turns into an insect monster because she is Sheila DeSoto.
What was
who
that?
I believe was... Yeah. She was a character that was referenced in, I think, 2 issues of Multiple Man.
Oh, really?
And that was it.
Oh,
yes, and so when I wrote the story back in 2010 originally... Yeah. Obviously, there was no talk of a merger between Disney and Fox, and so I said, this is a character that, in all likelihood, Fox has the rights to because she's technically introduced in a Jamie Madrox book. But I said, nobody is crying out for Sheila DeSoto to appear in any sort of live-action iteration, and so I said, I don't think it would be hard for Disney, Marvel, whatever, to get the rights to use this character in this limited situation because I was looking for a Chicago-based character.
Right.
And Sheila DeSoto and her fiance are from Chicago. And so I said, well, this will make for because I wanted Moon Knight to battle someone with some sort of powers or something before Bushman. You have to have that mini, not necessarily a mini boss fight, but you have to have some sort of action sequence, there. Mm-hmm. In the middle of the film, and so I said, well, this would be a good opportunity for him to have a fight, and who can I use? And she turns into an insect monster. It doesn't really necessarily fit with the rest of the film, and so I was probably going to cut that if I could find something else, but for the interim, that's what I had.
Yeah,
points to anyone who's listening if you already knew who Sheila DeSoto was.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had no idea. I knew she must have been somewhere in the Marvel universe, but I could not place her with Moon Knight at all. That was a little strange, I thought. But yeah, it's hang on, I'm just looking here because later on, well, in the script anyway, we get a nice little cameo. I want to mention it now of a werewolf, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. So for me, the couple of supernatural elements there kind of made a bit more sense. But if it does it appear in the synopsis as well?
I don't think I had any werewolves in the synopsis because again I couldn't find a place to organically mention. I probably would have thrown in a line somewhere referencing a werewolf just to give that nod.
That was a nice nod though. Yeah, in the script I just remember. and anyway, in the script. Moon Knight uses it to dispatch one of the goons, I guess, which is really cool. Reminded me of issue 20 of the Houston run with all those werewolves underground of the Lupine bar.
Mm-hmm. So, I remember.
Yeah, very cool indeed. All right, cool. So I've just got the synopsis open now, so I'm not looking at the draft 5 anymore. So sorry, Anthony, where do we go from DeSoto?
From DeSoto, then, so the story makes headlines, and then Bushman recognizes, because someone snapped a quick photo of Moon Knight, and even though he's got a very basic getup, that it's similar to what Mark was wearing when he left the tomb, and Bushman recognizes that's Mark. I know he's alive, because I needed to find some way for Bushman to know that Mark was alive, and that, for that to happen. So Bushman sees the report and goes, I know that getup. Yeah. That's Spectre.
Yeah.
I have to find him.
Yeah. And we also get between that.
So then this is where Stephen is now created, and so Mark returns home and he explains to Frenchie and Marlene, he's like, oh, now I'm also Stephen because I can get places as Stephen Grant that
yes.
I can't as
Yep.
a cabbie. And they're like, now this is crazy. You can't do this. And he said, oh, no, it's just names. I can handle it.
Yes.
But then we go into the dimly lit room, which is the conceit that I wanted to use for the rest of the film.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with the show The United States of Tara.
No.
So it was a show on HBO, Showtime, one of those channels, with Toni Collette, where she plays a housewife with multiple personalities.
Oh, okay.
And the way that it is demonstrated, or the way that it's done in the show, is inside her head is a table, and with all of the different personalities seated at the table, and they all interact with each other inside her head.
Right.
And so whoever is seated at the head of the table is the dominant personality at that point. And so I said, that is excellent for me to use to show this, but I naturally did it a little darker and grittier. So I have the table in a dimly lit room. Jake and Moon Knight are there, and then Stephen comes in and he asks, there's a locked door off on the side, and Moon Knight says the boss is in there, but he doesn't come out.
Yeah. Yes.
So sort of a little bit of foreshadowing. So Stephen then sits down at the table, and now he sets up Grant Corp. And so, he makes some money. He uses some of the money that he made when he was a mercenary, and he sets up this company, and then he buys a mansion with the helipad, and Marlene is happy at all this, and Stephen now is happy with Marlene, but, Jake and Moon Knight and whatever don't really care all that much.
Yep. Yeah. True, yeah. And so we then get this short introduction here, again, of Jenna and Crawley. As well.
Yeah, Gina's Diner. Yep, yeah. and then Crawley, who I love
one of
writing.
my favorites, really. He's such a cool.
Crawley
character.
He's such a fun character to write. To write all of that unnecessarily loquacious language.
Yes.
I thought was a lot of fun. I basically said, well, what do I want him to say, and then how can I make it as flowery as possible?
Exactly. And I think you nailed it. Yeah, and any Loony fans would know what we're talking about. It's just too many words to say just a very simple thing. But and he's got his tea bag as well.
Yep, the tea bag that he never changes. Gina's yelling at him, and
I like that.
Why don't you get a new tea bag? I'll change it when it loses its flavor.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, so when he gets home, Marlene's got the new Moon Knight costume she's sewed, and she said she's picked up the skill when she was from her mum, to make her a lady. And so they have a moment.
Yeah, that scene was one of the most important scenes for me in the film, and I never got around to writing it, but basically the gist of it was that this is where Marlene demonstrates it. The costume that she makes for Mark is a gesture of gratitude to thank him for giving her a place to live and for helping her after her father died. And because her mother only ever wanted her to be a lady, she had no interest in that. She wanted to go be with her father. And so her mother kept trying to make her into something that she wasn't until she finally, was able to embrace who she was. And it ties back into that theme of, throughout the film, of authenticity to who you are, and wearing the mask.
Yes.
And which we'll get to at the climax of the film, with the callback from Elias's speech.
Yeah.
So that was a very tender moment, and that's where I wanted to sort of shift the relationship to the next level between Mark and Marlene, and also give her a lot more background as a character and show that she's not just the arm candy.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, Marlene's also I think a fan favorite as well. Many times she pulls Mark out of the fire, and she is a steadying ship to his wild and rocky waves. So I think that's great how she's given a bit of time to flesh out here. Then we actually get Mark coming as Moon Knight coming across indirectly the Bushman with some of the thugs wearing a death's head pendant around their neck. So so he basically stops these thugs beating up an old bum, and when Crawley when he heads back to Jenna's, and Crawley says that, he hears the men have been savaged by bite marks. That triggers in Mark, obviously, Bushman's attack on Marlene's dad, and that kind of shocks him. So then again, we get another look into the mind here, Anthony.
Yeah, and so Jake is at the head of the table. Stephen's banging on the locked door inside the room. Whoever's in there come out. So Jake gets home, and he's shook up. Marlene is talking to Jake, and we've seen this a couple of times in the comic, that Marlene thinks she's talking to one persona, when in actuality he's another one.
Yes.
So she's talking to Jake, and we go inside, and no one is at the head of the table, which is a big thing, which sort of I used as a shorthand to show that, no one's really in control right now. And then Stephen sits down at the head of the table, and then he responds to Stephen. So, but there was that moment where he's really shook because of the Death's Head, because he's trying to figure out what all this means, and with the bite marks and everything. Yeah,
and he comes across it again as well. So as Stephen,
one of the employees
has
a Death's Head pendant, and so he's aligned with Bushman. So he says, Bushman knows who you are, and he goes to jump out the window, and Stephen leaves, and so we're back inside the room. Stephen is at the head of the table. Jake and Moon Knight are yelling. The three of them are arguing. The locked door opens, and Mark steps out.
Yeah.
And he goes to the head of the table, knocks Stephen out, and sits down. So, sort of the indicating that Mark is and always has been the dominant personality, but he was away because Mark, quote unquote, died that night in the tomb.
Yep.
But now that he knows for certain that Bushman is back, now because Mark has to be the one to defeat Bushman.
Yeah.
Not Jake, not Stephen, not even really Moon Knight, because this is Mark's fight. And so I really wanted to demonstrate that Mark had to be the one in control. And then we go back home, and Marlene talks to him, but he won't respond to Jake or Stephen. And so she slaps him, and then, so she reveals her fear and insecurity, because she's like, I'm falling in love with you, but I don't know who you are at any given point, and I need something to show, that you care, or I'm leaving. And so that's each persona, in his head says, I love you, Marlene, like one word from each of them. And then Mark is like, I love you. You're the only thing that all of us have in common.
Yeah.
You keep me grounded, but I need to stop Bushman.
Yeah. This is really good. I think this is really needed, because this is such a big thing for Marlene. I think in the comics as well, she's constantly at odds with someone, Mark / Stephen / Jake, who she loves. And earlier in the Mensch run, she calls out wrong names, or she doesn't know who the hell she's talking to. So I liked how you've kind of addressed that over here, and it kind of galvanizes Mark anyway as well for his upcoming battle with Bushman. So he has a short. A little interaction with Khonshu, and
Khonshu shows up, and he's like, "This is it. This is the big battle now. I need you to stop him, because you have to stop Bushman so that I can stop Seth."
Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of just the prelude, basically, to the would you call it the third act, or just the climax?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is definitely we're well into the third act at this point.
Yeah.
This is
the big climax then, I guess. It's kind of like we're all kind of all the pieces are in place. Khonshu's just kind of given the final go ahead, and off Moon Knight goes. So anyway, so they go to Bushman's location, which is a strip club, and
that was based in the comics at some point. I remember that there was a fight.
Okay.
It was definitely there. I remember at one point someone referred to it as a jiggle joint.
Yes, that was in... Yeah, Doug, I think that was in Volume 1, Issue 1.
I think that was in Volume 1, Issue 1, if I'm not mistaken. So I brought it back to that basic, the introduction, that first story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So then they, with Frenchie in the chopper, Moon Knight goes...
Also, no matter how old I get, the phrase jiggle joint just makes me laugh.
Yeah, you and me both. All right, it is fun. It's the first time I've ever heard of it when I read it. So anyway, Moon Knight battles his way through, and there's some clouds going over the moon, so things are happening with his powers, and he encounters Bushman and they start going at it. And Marlene turns up and stops him from killing Bushman. But
because her argument is, you'll be no better than he is.
Exactly.
And so on and so forth.
Exactly. And then there's another little mind table session here, Anthony, as well. At the table, all the four are arguing, no one's at their head. Moon Knight tells them all shut up. And there's some silence. And then a young Mark appears and recites Eliza's sermon, all about who we really are under our masks.
Exactly, yeah, which, I had tied in reference at the beginning.
Yes.
Elias, as rabbi, was giving a speech to the congregation about, that we all wear masks of some various point, but only God knows who we are under our mask. It was religious in theme.
Yep.
But young Mark remembers it at the climax, and this is when he has the idea, I know, who I am under my mask, also because I wanted to figure out a way for the actor playing Moon Knight to be able to emote and have this moment, because when he's Moon Knight, obviously he's got the mask on, and it's difficult for him to emote properly. So I wanted to give the actor the opportunity to show this with his face that,
Yes.
I'm not going to kill you. So Khonshu's very pissed off because Khonshu is bloodthirsty and wants death.
Exactly.
He says, I took off my mask. Now it's time for you to do the same.
Yeah.
And this is pulled straight from the Houston run.
Yep.
He carves Bushman's face off with the dart.
Yes, I like it. Again, I like how you tied it in to this message. Like, it kind of works seamlessly through it, and at the same time, it ties in and nods to obviously the Moon Knight comics with the Houston run. So very cool here. He obviously takes off his mask, and he literally takes off Bushman's mask as well, which we know is his face. Now, the thing here, Anthony, though, this actually. It always still shocks me that, a hero will carve off the face of a villain, whether it's in the comics or the script here. He does it here. Marlene's horrified. Now, look, initially, to be honest, I thought, this is far worse than him just killing Bushman, right? Because he's writhing and
absolutely
in pain and all that. But Mark manages to convince Marlene that, basically this is what I'm doing instead. And then off they go as the cops show up. So Bushman's left in a terrible state with the moniker of the Moon Knight Crescent Dart as obviously calling card. Again, another little touch to the Mensch run.
Yep, exactly. Just all those little Easter eggs that I had throughout the thing. Because again, the original story was so brilliantly done that I really, it's one of those things, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yep. So I wasn't really trying to reinvent the wheel. I just wanted to incorporate everything as best as I could and then go from there with it.
Really, really good. I really did love the, I don't know, do you call it fan service then of this, as you're saying, the little Easter eggs? Really,
sort of,
yeah.
I guess. Yeah. It's fan service, but it's fan service that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's logical and organic to the story.
Yeah, exactly. Not just for the sake of it, not just for the sake, I'm just going to drop it in. Yeah, that's what I meant earlier, how kind of seamless it ties in with what you're trying to tell and what you set up earlier, which is pretty good. So anyway, it ends on then back at the mansion. There's they're sparring, and there's just a final scene with at the table, all the four getting along, all the four identities, and everyone just willingly leaves the head spot, just bare. So in there, I guess the message is that there's a bit of peace between all the four identities, not one dominant over the other.
Yeah, he's figured out how to peacefully coexist amongst his own head, and so it's a little more comfortable for him. So all of the various identities will get along, and they cooperate because they understand that they're all part of the larger gestalt. And so if he has to be Steven, all right, then Steven takes over, and then okay, now I need to be Jake, and then Jake takes over, and so on. So
yeah, it's kind of good because it sets him up for, I guess, the parts 2 and part 3 where this conflict has resolved in some sense. So that's good. Not to say that it could trigger off again, who knows, but there's a nice sense of closure here by having that table with a willing vacant spot at the head. Really good. And then it ends off, Anthony, with we do a round kind of thing, a cyclical thing. And
the bookends. He's back on patrol.
He's back on patrol.
He said,
yeah.
They ask, why do I do this? Why would I want to live any other way?
Yeah. And then he sees someone getting mugged, and he jumps off the roof into the camera, and that's the end of the script. So, yeah. Oh, wow. There's a lot of stuff packed in here, Anthony. As I mentioned, what I really do love is how you've kind of threaded the fan stuff, like the comic related stuff, kind of making it into your own and using it to kind of further your ideas of things that you've set up before. So yeah, very, very good read indeed.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to write. Just a lot of fun to come up with all the different ideas and to figure out a way to incorporate it all in a way that made sense, that was organic to the story, that does a service to the characters that we've all come to love and know over the years, and really, just make a cool film that I think could appeal to a large number of people.
Yeah. Most definitely. And I guess the only question is, Anthony, when's part 2 and part 3 coming out?
Well, like I said, I could sit down and start coming up with part 2. I have so many ideas for part 2. Yeah. I really think if I were to do it, I would want to sit down and get back into the flow of writing just a little bit more, which, maybe I might be able to do. My wife is currently pregnant. She's due in a couple of weeks, and probably by the time this episode comes out, my son will have been born. Yeah. And so I'll be home, and while she's sleeping and while my son is sleeping, whatever, I'll have time on my hands. Yeah. So I can perhaps get back into the flow of writing, and who knows, maybe I'll make a follow-up appearance, and I'll tell you sort of what's to come for Moon Knight in Moon Knight 2, Priest of Khonshu.
Yes.
So
yeah, cool. That'd be absolutely awesome. So Loonies, that was Anthony's script. Now, I haven't discussed it with you, Anthony, as well. So what I'm going to say, just because I'll leave it obviously to your discretion, because it is your property. Any Loonies that are keen on reading this script, in the show notes, we'll have contacts of how to reach Anthony. If you want to, drop him a line. And look, Anthony, I'll just leave it at your discretion. I know that we haven't discussed it. It's a really good read. And anyway, it makes it exciting to kind of, it's kind of one step towards having Moon Knight, or the thought of having Moon Knight on screen. So I'd like to thank you, Anthony, so much for joining me tonight.
Oh, no, it's been a pleasure, Ray. Thank you so much. I always appreciate listening to your show every week.
Oh,
it's great.
Thank you.
So you and Connor, guys, you have an amazing job, and I'm looking forward to future episodes.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And so for our spectacle, our show notes, obviously I'd like to shout out Capes on the Couch podcast, where Comics Get Counselling. That's where you can find Anthony. That's where you can hear his dulcet tones speaking with his good friend Doc Issues, all to do with comic book characters who have a bit of trouble up there upstairs. I'd like to also then just extend this, Anthony. Is there a podcast that you'd like to give a shout out to, and we'll add the show notes as well for them?
I'm going to give a shout out to our friends at Popcorn Psychology. We did have the crossover with them on the Incredible Hulk episode, and so they are good friends of ours. We interact constantly. There's a lot of back and forth on Twitter. They are available. You can find them on Twitter at popcorn_psych. I believe they're distributed through Spreaker. But basically, if you just do a internet search for Popcorn Psychology, it's Hannah, Brittany, and Ben, and they are 3 therapists out of Chicago. Oddly enough, Chicago. And so they analyze blockbuster films much in the way that we analyze comic book characters. They talk about films and what the psychology of the characters in those films are. So they've done a large number of comic book movies. They did Logan, Captain America Civil War, Batman Begins, et cetera, et cetera. So they do an amazing job. And we were on their show and we talked about the Incredible Hulk, the Edward Norton film, not the Eric Bana one.
Oh, cool! No, that would have been good. Oh, the Eric Bana one would have been interesting as well, I guess. But
yeah, there's a lot there, a lot to unpack.
Yeah, a lot to unpack, definitely. Yeah, great. So Popcorn Psychology, just check the info on our show notes for that. Next phase, the moon will be in its last quarter, Loony. So we'll be having our Avatars of Vengeance It's a review on video game related stuff. Nothing set in stone as yet, so keep an eye on our weekly newsletter to figure out what Connor and I will be chatting about. I do hope it is about the Moon Knight pinball game, because I've been playing that. That's been pretty fun.
That's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, you played as well?
Yep.
Yeah.
I've played it. It's not something I play regularly. Last night, though, interestingly enough, my wife and I were playing Lego Marvel Avengers, and so I was definitely running around as Moon Knight quite a bit.
Oh yeah, I wonder who. Excellent. And so, actually, that wraps up our show. Basically, Loonies, you can catch us on email, itkmoonnight@gmail.com. We've got a website, intothenight.podcast.wordpress.com. We're on Facebook. We've got a page, facebook.com/itkmoonnight, and a fantastic group, which Anthony is a Loony in there. He's an Omega level Loony at facebook.com/groups/itkmoonnight. We're on Twitter at itkmoonnight, and incidentally, Capes on the Couch, and as you mentioned, Anthony, Popcorn Psychology. They're quite active on Twitter, so you can easily find them there as well. And we're on Instagram, Tumblr, YouTube. Just search for Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast. iTunes ratings, if you'd be so kind, a 5-star review would be good. If not, we always look to improve ourselves, so let us know what you think of the show, and how we can make it better. And finally, we're on all good podcast catchers, so the likes of Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, blah, 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 Stitcher, Spotify, all that jazz. Look, if you're listening to us now, then you've already got your podcast catcher. But tell your friends. So anyway, once again, Anthony, thank you so much for your time. I know we've run over time, so I do apologize for that. But I do hope it hasn't...
Oh, that's okay. I could never talk about Moon Knight long enough, so I appreciate just having the opportunity to talk about him at all.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute pleasure from us, and it's so much fun talking about this script. So I'd like to maybe one day have you on our Isla Ra sessions. It was really interesting to hear about you at the top of the show. I'd like to dig deeper, talking about your comics, your loves, and more about Moon Knight. So, I don't know if you're keen on that.
Definitely. Definitely. I look forward to it.
Awesome.
Anytime you want me, I'll be more than happy to come back.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. And be sure to have our other High Priest Connor with us. So without Loonies, thank you so much for listening. And as always, may Khonshu watch over the denizens of the night. Catch you later.
Moon Knight and affiliated characters, stories and events are properties of Marvel Characters Incorporated. Materials used and discussed within the podcast are intended for critique and review purposes only under the fair dealing concept of the current Copyright Act. The views, information or opinions expressed during the podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the copyright owners.